If Zaneta was the strongest physical damage dealer released before the advent of Neo Visions, Angel of Death Kuja definitely takes the cake for magic damage dealers. Also, why'd he get a CG limit burst anyways? In Dissidia, he looked like he was a villain. Just goes to show what I know. First off, his Trustmaster reward, Trance Power, is incredible. First, there's the standard magic 40% boost, but then the unit gets an extra boost if they're dual wielding, and on top of that there's a small boost to limit burst damage. The only thing that stops this Trustmaster reward from being ridiculous is the fact that most magic damage dealers don't rely on their limit burst for damage that often. Still, a unit like that might show up in the future, and this is a Trustmaster reward with excellent potential longevity. It wouldn't hurt to get a single copy of this Trustmaster reward even if you don't care about Kuja in particular. His Super Trustmaster reward, Brummel Cores, are those two glowy orbs floating right next to him. I didn't expect them to be a rod, they look more like a throwing weapon to me. Well, regardless, it comes with an incredible amount of magic, but the real reason to consider getting it is its bonus effect, the ability to autocast Angel's magic. It increases both fire and light damage by 10%. This is a new type of buff that hasn't been implemented before in Final Fantasy Brave Exvius, so it'd certainly be interesting to see which direction the developers go with this. Let's get to his active skills. Osmos Elegy does the same thing as Osmos. Don't try to pretend you're something you're not. All of Kuja's actual attacks chain with Chaos Wave Awaken, so that's a pretty good sign. Here we have Solar Onslaught, a fire magic attack that also imperils the enemy's fire resistance by 100%. Astral Onslaught is the same, though it dabbles with the light element instead. Refreshing Rondo recovers a flat 80 MP for your entire team, and then throws an MP regen on top of that. Legato Strike is an attack that partially ignores the enemy's spirit, but it's more noticeable in the fact that it can enable quadruple cast for Kuja. Surprisingly, the developers decided to give Kuja some nifty support abilities that also deal damage. Glorious Ascension not only chains of Chaos Wave Awaken, but also increases your team's fire resistance by 75%. Sublime Ascension does the same thing, though it deals light damage and increases their light resistance instead. On another note, did you know Glorious and Sublime are basically the same word? They could have just combined the two elemental resistances, but I guess the chaining ability makes up for this loss. Regardless, let's move on. Warfare is a powerful fire magic attack that partially ignores the enemy's spirit. It also increases the damage modifier of his other fire attacks and lets him use Flare Symphony, which is basically a more powerful fire attack that increases the damage modifier of other abilities as well. Crusade is the same, though it deals light damage, increases the damage modifier of his other light attacks, and enables Holy Symphony, which is just a powerful light attack that increases the damage modifier of his other abilities as well. Warfare and Crusade also don't need any MP to use. This isn't an advantage, as they require you to spend your limit burst gauge instead. Let's talk about his cooldown abilities. Overture Limit increases the damage modifier of Warfare and Crusade, and automatically fills up his limit burst on the following 2 turns. Speaking of his limit burst, Ultima Symphony breaks the enemy's defense and spirit by 70%, increases his magic stat by 250%, and deals a significant amount of magic damage that partially ignores the enemy's spirit. Back to his other cooldown abilities. Igneous Zeal is a Fire Chaos Wave Awaken attack that partially ignores the enemy's spirit. It also fills up Kuja's limit burst by half of its max capacity. Angelic Advance is the light counterpart to this attack. Finally, Soul Splitter decreases the enemy's fire and light resistance by 120%, increases Kuja's magic stat by a whopping 300%, gives him a magic killer against demons and undead monsters, and lets him quadruple cast for 5 turns. Let's look at his passive abilities. He likes to dual wield and has an innate 50% resistance against fire and light attacks. He actually already has a 200% magic killer against demons and undeads, so that's pretty significant. Also, every time he begins the battle, he boosts his own limit burst damage by 200%, which is pretty ridiculous when you realize that his limit burst is instantly filled whenever he joins the fray. And for whatever reason, his jealousy of his brother grants him immunity to paralysis, confusion, and petrification. Somehow. Now to create a rotation for him. I'll use him as a fire elemental damage dealer, though you can certainly use light if you'd like. First off, use Soul Splitter, cast Overture Limit, and use up his Limit Burst to cast Warfare. Thanks to Overture Limit, Kuja's Limit Burst will be instantly filled on turn 2, where you'll triple cast Flare Symphony and sacrifice his Limit Burst to cast Warfare once again. Now, attentive viewers may have noticed that I didn't use Igneous Zeal or Angelic Advance when they were available on the second turn. That's because I wanted to use them to guarantee his Limit Burst on turn 4. Thanks to Overture Limit, Kuja's Limit Burst will instantly be filled on the third turn. Use Flare Symphony, cast Warfare, and use both Angelic Advance and Igneous Zeal to fill up his Limit Burst. On turn 4, triple cast Flare Symphony and sacrifice his Limit Burst to cast Warfare. On turn 5, cast Soul Splitter once again, use Flare Symphony, and use both Angelic Advance and Igneous Zeal to fill up his Limit Burst gauge. On turn 6, triple cast Flare Symphony and use Warfare. On turn 7, cast Overture Limit, use Flare Symphony, and cast Angelic Advance and Igneous Zeal. At this point, I think you get the gist. Cast both Angelic Advance and Igneous Zeal every other turn so you can fill up his Limit Burst. This way, you can sacrifice it to cast Warfare or Crusade, which in turn will give you access to Flare Symphony or Holy Symphony. Make sure to cast Soul Splitter and Overture Limit to bring back his buffs whenever they're available. So that's it. How good is Angel of Death Kuja? As I've been saying in previous videos, he blows Umbro Dragon Darkfina out of the water. Her strongest attacks are basically what's normal for Angel of Death Kuja. His introduction has basically marked the moment where a magic damage dealer can surpass a physical damage dealer in general gameplay. He's a lot of fun to use, especially when you take the time to consider the abilities you'll prioritize to grant him a further boost in damage. And while his damage can be surpassed eventually, he can still bring elemental resistance and MP refill to the table. And well, that's honestly the only other thing that he can provide. But what about Neo Visions? To be honest, I think summoning Kuja is a better investment than Zaneta, though only if you keep their damage capabilities in mind. Thanks to Mastermind Zon, Zaneta is far more valuable for instant clear fights, though Kuja does have his own brand of killers that he can bring to the table. But if you do care about their damage output, then you do have to understand that there are a ridiculous amount of powerful physical damage dealers, compared to the paltry amount of magic Neo Vision units. But really, try not to put too much stock in Neo Visions. Even though its approach draws ever closer, the earliest units will ultimately be surpassed by those that come after it anyways, so the base idea of the game will basically stay the same. No matter which new unit comes out, there will always be a better one eventually. As such, just save your Lapis until you find a unit that appeals to you in some other fashion. If you keep spending Lapis just to get a bigger number, you're going to see the more important numbers drop to 0. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Tell me if you'll try to summon Angel of Death Kuja, or if you'd rather save your Lapis instead.